because some of you probably don't know this. Thought he rested on the Shabbat. No, Don, that's what they always tell us right here. Let me show you something. Before we go to what I was getting ready to show you guys in Daniel chapter 12, let me read this, Don. And again, that's a great, great question, right? You thought, and I thought, and most of us thought. But look at this, Matthew chapter 28, verse 1. But late in the Sabbath, you see that, Don? But late in the Sabbath. This is why, again, I say translations are very important to have. The right translation is very important, because if I read this in the King James Version, let me pull that up real quick for you. In the King James Version, it says this. Because they wanted it to all harmonize. They wanted all of it to harmonize, because see, the only of the four gospels that we have to this day that we know that's still intact in the Hebrew is Matthew. We have no copies of Mark in Hebrew. We have no copies of Luke and John in Hebrew. So let me show you this real quick. Now in Matthew 28, in the King James Version, notice how it reads, in the end of the Sabbath. So they're saying here in the King James Version, the Sabbath is over. Okay. But then they mess up and it says, as it began to dawn toward the first day. So to began to dawn means that it wasn't there yet. So which one is it? Is the Sabbath over, or is it the first day? Which one? This in itself makes no sense. So now let me take you back to the scriptures. The scriptures show you, or tells you, oh, I'm sorry about that, you guys. But late in the Sabbath, meaning the Sabbath isn't over yet, as it was dawning into day one of the week, Marian from Magdala and the other Mary came to see the tomb. And notice it says, and see, there was a great earthquake, from a messenger of Yahuwah came down out of the Shama, out of the heaven, and came and rolled back the stone from the door and sat on it. And his appearance was like lightning, and his garment was white as snow. But notice what he says, verse 5. And the messenger responded and said to the women, do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Yahusha, who was impaled. He is not here, and he was raised, as he said. Come see the place where the master lay. So they went and looked, but this happened late in the Sabbath. The Sabbath wasn't over yet. He was raised at the beginning of the Sabbath. We know this by going back and looking at the scriptures. Now let me show you, and this is why. I didn't get to see what you had penned earlier, Adam, but if it's important, we'll go back to that. Yeah. So let me show you guys something here from the calendar. Okay. Remember, the Messiah said that he was going to be in the belly of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. Okay. Now we can do this clearly from the calendar to see that he was raised on the Sabbath. And this is the reason why they keep lying to us, because they want us to be Sunday worshipers, okay? And this goes against his whole plan. Remember, it even says this here. Let me take you here to John real quick before I read this. John chapter 5. I believe that's where it is. Or is it? Chapter 6. Now notice this. I'm in John chapter 6. I was looking for the number there. Notice here in verse 44. All right. Even though we have to read all of this, I want you to see something. No one is able to come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him. Now, this is the sentence I want you to notice. And I shall raise him up in the last day. What's the last day? What's the last day? Anyone? Anybody know what the last day is? Okay, Sassy, you're kind of right. Ochada, you're right. Nazareth, you're right. It's the 7th day. The 7th day, what is Sabbath? True story. You got it right. Shabbat is the last day. Okay. Shabbat is the last day of the week. Remember, a day is 1,000 years and 1,000 years is a day. If Yah is going to, this is why it doesn't make any sense for anyone to think that he rested on the Shabbat in the grave. Then that means that we would not have a millennial reign. That means we as his body would also be in the grave during the whole 1,000 years. But that doesn't make sense, does it? It doesn't line up with his pattern. This is why you know the lying pens of the scribe has changed the New Testament. This is why you'll see where one says only one angel was there in front of the tomb. And then another passage will say there was two angels in front of the tomb. Well, which one was it? Was there one angel or was there two angels? Did it take two angels to roll away the tomb or the stone from the tomb? Or was it one? Which one was it? But this is what you'll find in the New Testament Gospels. But let it be assured that we all know that he was unalived and he was raised back. Oh, he was buried and then he was raised back from the dead. Okay. But I wanted to show you another one that's going to go along with that. And then I'm going to show you what it says in Daniel chapter 12. Okay. I'm looking for this passage right now. Hold on one second. Let me find it. Oh, is it in Matthew? It might be in Matthew. Hold on, you guys. Again, like I say, I don't know everything. Where is the story about Lazarus? Does anyone know where the story is about Lazarus? The one who had passed away. I thought it was in John for some reason. I'm looking for the passage about Lazarus. John 11. Okay, thank you, Don. And Luke 16. Let's see if this is the one that I'm looking for. Yes, thank you. Here we go. So let me put this back on here, Don, since this was your question. You said you thought he was rested in the tomb on Shabbat. Well, here's another one that's going to tell you about what we're talking about here. Okay. Now notice here, we're talking about Lazarus. Okay. He was already unalive. And here his real name is Eleazar, not Lazarus. You see it here? Al-Lazar has died, was unalived, right? Let me bring this down a little more, but I want you to see this. So he had already been unalived for 4 days in the tomb, okay? And so it says, Martha then, when she heard that Yahusha was coming, met him, but Miriam was sitting in the house. And Martha then said to Yahusha the master, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Okay. Now, mind you, Mary Magdalene and Martha are sisters. Lazarus is their brother. Just so you guys know. Okay, so let's continue. So it goes on and says, but even now I know that whatever you might ask of Elohim, Elohim shall give you. And then Yahusha said to her, your brother shall rise again. And Martha said to him, and notice what Martha says, I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Do you see that? Do you guys see that? At the last day. Okay. Now we're going to go down here. There's another passage. Where is it? I don't see it at the very moment. Let me see here. I thought it was here. I must be mistaken with something else. But so you see that again, this lines up with a day being 1,000 years and 1,000 years being a day. The seventh day, also known as Shabbat, the day of rest. It also coincides or lines up with the 1,000 years of rest in Revelation chapter 20, that we shall rule and reign with him for 1,000 years. Now that lines up again as we go there. Revelation chapter 20. This is the 7th millennium. This is the millennial reign. This would be the millennial Shabbat. Okay. This is why we know that the Messiah was not in the grave all the way until the proverbial Sunday. And it wasn't even a Sunday, but I'm going to show you through even the calendar that was wrong. But let me show you this. Verse 4. This is chapter 20 of Revelation. Okay, chapter 20, verse 4. And I saw thrones, and they that sat on them, and judgment was given to them. That is you and me, the Kodashim, okay, the saints of the Most High. And the lives of those who had been beheaded because of the witness they bore to Yahusha. This may be some of our future. We pray that it not be, but it may be, and he will give us the strength to endure to the end. And because of the word of Elohim. So here you have the New Testament and the Old Testament. Notice, witness they bore to Yahusha, that's New Testament. And because of the word of Elohim, that's the Old Testament. And who did not worship the beast, nor his image, and did not receive his mark upon their foreheads or upon their hands. And they lived, talking about these who were beheaded, and they lived and reigned with the Messiah for 1,000 years. And the rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection. Baruch and set apart is the one having part in the first resurrection. The second death, which is the lake of fire, possesses no authority or power over these, but they shall be priests of Elohim, of the Mighty One, and of the Messiah, and they shall reign with him 1,000 years. Okay, so this again lines up with a day, 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is a day. Psalms 90 verse 4 and 2 Peter chapter 3 verse 8. Okay, so again, he was not in the grave during the Shabbat. I know that's what we've been taught, and I know you'll find that in the book of Mark and in the book of Luke, but in the book of Matthew, it is that the Shabbat was not over. And when they went to the tomb, when the Shabbat was not over, Matthew 28 verse 1, his body was not there. Why? Because he was already resurrected. So now, let's do this. Let me show you from the calendar how this lines up. Here it is, the first month, okay, Kodash 1. Here is the Passover. Now, we can go and read in Matthew chapter 20, I want to say 27, where he had the Passover with his Kodashim, with his Talmudim, that is the disciples, okay? They did it in the evening. In fact, let me take you there. Matthew... Oh, it's not 27. Yeah, it is 27. No, it's not 27. It was 26, one chapter before. Notice here. And on the first day, this is Matthew 26, verse 17. And on the first day of unleavened bread, the taught ones came to Yahusha, saying to him, notice it says the first day of unleavened bread. The first day of unleavened bread is Passover. Even though we know the first day of unleavened bread to be on the 15th, we're actually talking about the Passover, and you'll see what I'm saying. Because in the customs of the Hebrews, it was already understood that the Pesach was part of the days of unleavened bread, okay? So let's go here. On the first day of unleavened bread, the taught ones came to Yahusha, saying to him, where do you wish to us to prepare you to eat the Pesach? That's the Passover. So once again, the first day of unleavened bread is Passover. And he said, go into the city of a certain man and say to him, the teacher says, my time is near. I am to perform the Pesach at your house with my taught ones. And it says here, and the taught ones did as Yahusha had ordered them and prepared the Pesach, the Passover. Notice verse 20. And when evening came, that is exactly what we're told in Leviticus chapter 23. He sat down with the 12, and while they were eating, he said, truly, that one of you is going to deliver me up. Now let's go to Leviticus real quick, and I'm going to show you on the calendar, Leviticus chapter 23. Right here, on the first of the new month, on the 14th day of the new month, and this says between, it should say at the evening is the Pesach, okay? But notice it has evening here. This is when you are to perform the Pesach at evening. So Matthew 26, it says that's when they did it, right? So he kept the Passover. He is our example. He fulfilled the law. He had to do exactly what was said, and he did it because it was his words. He is the Old Testament. And so this is why they did this. When evening came, he sat down with the 12, okay? So now we can go to the calendar. This square here, this is the 14th, okay? You can barely see 1-4. You can see 13, you can see 15, but it's behind this. So this whole square is a 24-hour period, okay? This would, imagine this line here on this side of this square to be morning. This preparation day right here, this is the daylight time right here. Okay. This would be the nighttime. So right here in the middle would be evening. That's the twilight. That's where we get evening day and evening night, which is why we call evening is even. Okay. So he was doing the Passover. The Mashach was doing the Passover. So after this happened, what happened? He got done eating the Passover. Then they went to the Mount of Olives that night. That's when he was taken. He was arrested at night. Remember that. He was arrested that night. So now it was the next day on the 15th. Okay. The next day during the day portion, because he went to the, what do they call it? The Sanhedrin court in the middle of the night before the high priest. Okay. He was before the high priest at night. And then they took him to Pontius Pilate in the day. And this is when they were saying, crucify him, let his blood be upon us and our children. That happened during the day. They impaled him around 12 o'clock at midday. Remember? And then he gave up his spirit right around the 9th hour, which would be 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And remember, he said to the Pharisees and Sadducees before that, they wanted to see a sign. He said, no sign shall be given except for the sign of Jonah. As Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so shall the Son be in the belly of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. Okay, so now here we go. He was unalived that day at 3 o'clock. His body was put into the grave because remember, Joseph of Arimathea, the rich man, came over there and he had already bought a tomb, and he asked for the body of Yahusha from Pontius Pilate. And he said that they had to take him down because it was a custom of the law, as it is in the Torah, curses any man who is hanging on a tree, but you are not allowed to allow his body to be hanging through the night. The body has to be brought down before the sun goes down. So they brought his body down first night in the grave. Remember, 3 nights and 3 days. Here we go. This is the first night, first day, second night, second day, third night, third day. He said he would raise on the 3rd day. This is the 3rd day. You see that? Do you guys see that? He was raised at the very beginning of the Shabbat, just like at the very beginning of the millennial reign, we shall be in our new bodies. Okay? It's set in stone. It's set in stone, people. Don't let the Catholic Church fool us anymore. They've been doing this too long, and they've been lying to us through the pens of the scribes. Because when you read stuff like Mark and Luke, and I'm not saying that all of it is wrong, but when they want you to start worshiping on what they call the Lord's Day, they say Lord's Day is Sunday. That's nowhere in Scripture. They even try to use the Lord's Day in Revelation and say that was on a Sunday when John had the revelation. Get out of here. Get out of here. That's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So here it is again, and here it is, chapter 16 of Mark. Okay. Now I just showed you, and this is right here in the scriptures. Even the scriptures realize, and they just wrote it the way it is, even though this is correct because this came straight from the Hebrew. But late in the Sabbath, okay, so the Sabbath ain't over here in Matthew, but let's read Mark. And when the Sabbath was passed, notice that when the Sabbath was passed, that means the Sabbath has ended according to the Gospel of Mark. Miriam from Magdala and Miriam, the mother of Yaakov, and Sholomah bought spices to go and anoint him. And very early on day 1 of the week, notice this says very early on the day 1 of the week, they came to the tomb. But Matthew said something different. Do you see the difference here? And they came when the sun had risen. Notice that they came to the tomb when the sun had risen. And they're talking about, well, who's going to remove the stone away from the tomb for us? Okay, now let's go to Luke. Let's look at what Luke says about this. Okay. Luke chapter 24. But on day 1 of the week, they don't even talk about the Sabbath here being if it was already over or not. It doesn't matter because here we're told that it was the first day of the week. This is where you get your so-called Sunday. At early dawn, they came to the tomb. bringing spices which they had prepared, and they found the stone rolled away from the tomb. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, and having entered, they did not find the body of the master Yahusha. And it came to be, as they were perplexed about this, that see, 2 men stood by them in glittering garments, and become frightened, and bowing their faces to the earth, these said to them, Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here, but has been raised up. So wait a minute. Matthew 28 says that they saw one angel, and that one angel says, Do not be afraid. I know whom you're seeking. You're seeking Yahusha. He is not here. He is risen. But here they're saying that 2 of them showed up, and 2 of them, while they were over here perplexed, trying to figure out what had happened, they're like, oh, and here comes these 2 beings in glittering, shiny clothes. This is how you see the lying pen of the scribes right here in the Gospels. Right here in the Gospels. And it doesn't line up with what I just showed you here. Okay? Because if it would have went past the Sabbath, now you're talking about more than 3 days. Because again, this happened in the evening. That's 1 night, 2 nights, 3 nights. Okay? That's 1 day, 2 day, and on the 3rd day, he says on the 3rd day he would rise. If it was not the 3rd day, then he would have raised on the 1st day of the week, and that would have been 4 days. Then it would not be like the sign of Jonah. It would have been a whole new sign, but that's not it. But the Roman Catholic Church wants everything to be set up because they are sun worshipers of Sol Invictus and they are Mithras. They want it to line up with the 1st day. And we know even this wasn't even the 1st day of what they call on their Gregorian week, Sunday. It might have been, if we would go back and look at it, I haven't actually looked into it, but it might have been a Wednesday on their calendar. It could have been a Thursday on their calendar. But they have allowed everything to harmonize to their understanding, changing the scriptures, just like they changed the name of the Messiah, just like they changed the 10 commandments in their own books of the Catholic Church. They don't have where it talks about you shall not make any graven idols or images, because they have graven idols and images all over the place.